She ironed his name. I remember standing in the doorway, watching her press the fabric with slow, careful strokes, like it was sacred. Her hands didn't shake. Her face didn't flinch. But she was ironing a name tag with his name on it. I don't know how I knew it wasn't for me. It had our school's reunion logo on it. Sure, just like mine. Same glossy laminate. Same font. But it didn't have my name. I asked, stupidly, is that for me? She didn't answer right away. Just kept ironing. Then finally, without looking up, she said, "You're not the only one excited to go." Except I wasn't excited at all. The reunion was her thing. Her high school. Her memories. Her people. I was just the placeholder husband. The one who holds the coats and makes small talk with people who can't remember his name. I had no business asking questions about that name tag, and I knew it. But something about the way she smoothed the edges, how carefully she tucked it into her clutch, it stuck with me. That night, she wore red. Not a playful red. Not a soft red. A deliberate red, the kind you wear when you want to be remembered. Lipstick to match. Hairstyled like she wanted to resurrect someone else's memory of her. Someone who wasn't me. We barely spoke on the drive there. She hummed along to the radio while I stared out the window, counting every exit as a potential escape route. The hotel was nicer than I expected. Fake candles on every table. Strings of lights draped along the ceiling like it was a prom for 30-somethings who never grew out of their cliques. But I didn't notice much of it. I only noticed her. The way she straightened her shoulders when she walked in. The sudden curve of her smile. The spark that hadn't appeared in years, at least not for me. I followed behind her like fog. And then, before I could even catch up, she stopped. Her breath caught. Her hand went to her chest, light and trembling, like she'd seen a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost. It was him. He looked older, sure. A little grayer around the temples. But he had that same arrogant posture I've only ever seen in men who think nothing they do will ever have consequences. He smiled, wide, teeth like a billboard, and opened his arms. And she walked into them. I mean walked. No hesitation. No glance toward me. Just straight into his arms like she'd rehearsed it in a dream. They held each other longer than you should when your husband is watching. He whispered something into her hair, and she laughed, not politely, not nervously. She laughed like it cracked something open in her. And that's when her body gave out. Her head dropped. Her knees buckled. He barely caught her before she collapsed entirely. A scream from someone near the bar. A chair knocked over. Her name echoing across the room in voices that weren't mine. I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet were ice, my lungs static. People rushed in. Someone called for help. Someone shouted to get water. But all I could hear was the sound of him saying her name again and again. Not mine. His. The room didn't go quiet. It went silent. The kind of silence where people stop pretending they weren't watching. Where even the clinking of a wine glass feels offensive. Where the air feels like it's pressing down on your shoulders. Someone shouted, "Does she have a medical condition?" And I watched the man holding my wife hesitate. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel wrong. He looked around like he was expecting someone else to answer. Not me. Not her husband. But someone who actually knew her. And I didn't move. I couldn't. It was like all the sounds were coming from underwater. I heard phrases I couldn't connect to anything. She's not responsive. Get the hotel medic. Is she allergic to anything? I stood there, blinking, still holding my coat over one arm, while my wife lay limp in another man's embrace. Eventually, someone, Darcy, I think, snapped her fingers in front of me. Ezra. Hey, Ezra, what does she take? Any meds? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't even know if she still took that anxiety stuff. The last time I asked, she said she was handling things differently now. Apparently, that meant collapsing in a man's arms at a reunion. The paramedics arrived fast. They moved with the kind of urgency that makes you nauseous. They didn't ask who I was. They didn't even look at me. They took vitals, unzipped gear bags, strapped wires to her arms, placed a mask over her face. Then they rolled her out while I followed like a ghost trailing behind. But he rode in the ambulance. Not me. Him. I got there just in time to see him climb in and sit beside her, gripping her hand like he had every right. No one stopped him. No one even questioned it. The EMTs closed the doors, and I was left on the curb under buzzing yellow lights, clutching her purse and wondering when exactly I became a supporting character in my own life. I took a taxi, not because I was being noble, but because I didn't want to break down in front of people. I wanted the privacy of the back seat, the sound of someone else's radio, and a stranger who didn't care what my face looked like in that moment. At the hospital, I stood at the front desk for 10 full minutes before someone finally told me what room she was in. I made it up to the ICU waiting area, heart hammering, throat raw, and saw him sitting there. Alone, his hands covered in hers. He looked up. We locked eyes. And what he said next wasn't, "Are you okay?" Wasn't, "She's stable." Wasn't even, "I'm sorry." It was, "She was asking about me before she passed out." And that was the moment something inside me snapped. Not like glass, not sharp. More like fabric tearing slowly. Because I realized he wasn't surprised by any of this. They let me into the room eventually. After the wires had been adjusted, after the monitors had stopped screaming, after the doctors had scribbled things and muttered phrases like dehydration and possible vasovagal episode. The kinds of terms that sound medical enough to keep people from asking deeper questions. I stepped in expecting her to be asleep. I needed her to be asleep. I needed a second to breathe in the same space as her without the weight of confrontation pressing against my ribs. But she was awake. Awake and whispering something to him. He was still sitting there, in my seat, holding her hand. Like they'd done this before. Like this was some warped hospital tradition they shared, and I was just the awkward outsider who didn't know the rules. I stood there too long before she even noticed me. Her eyes were glassy, her skin pale, her lips cracked. She looked fragile, and I felt the guilt start to rise. That awful, instinctive guilt you feel when someone you love is hurting, even if they're the one who's been hurting you all along. She turned her head slowly, as if surprised I was there at all. "Ezra," she said, voice hoarse. I nodded, but didn't move closer. She glanced back at him. "I thought you had to leave," she said to him, softer, almost sad. He didn't answer, just gave her a look that made my stomach knot. And then, finally, he stood up and left without a word, brushing past me like I was a coat rack. I waited until the door clicked shut before I spoke. "You passed out," I said. My voice sounded foreign, too steady. She looked away. "Yeah, that happens sometimes." "Since when?" She flinched. "It's nothing serious. The doctor said it's stress, heat, whatever." "Stress from what?" I asked. "Hugging your old boyfriend." That was the first time I saw something crack in her face. A tiny twitch at the corner of her mouth. Not guilt. Not shame. Something closer to exhaustion. Like she was tired of pretending not to be caught. She didn't answer. Instead, she pulled at the 4-line in her arm, just gently enough to remind me how delicate she looked under all that hospital light. "You didn't answer when they asked about your meds." I didn't even know what to tell them. She closed her eyes. "Because you don't ask anymore, Ezra." That landed like a slap. And maybe I deserved it. But it didn't make anything less broken. After a long pause, I asked what I really wanted to know. "Why was he the one in the ambulance with you?" She didn't open her eyes. "Because he ran toward me when I fell." "You didn't." The silence after that wasn't loud. It was final. I left the room without saying another word, but I didn't go home. I sat in the hospital hallway, staring at the pale blue tiles, trying to figure out whether I was losing my mind, or if this entire night had just confirmed what I had been afraid of for a long time. She was drifting, and someone else had already caught her. I didn't go home. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even check the time. Instead, I wandered the halls of that hospital like a ghost in the wrong story. The coffee in the waiting room tasted like chemicals. I drank 3 cups of it, trying to convince myself I was awake, that all of this was actually happening, and I wasn't going to blink and find myself back in the car with her humming along to the radio like nothing ever cracked. At some point, I went back to the room. She was asleep, or pretending to be. I stood in the doorway and just stared for a while. The machines beeped like a metronome for a life I wasn't part of anymore. She looked peaceful, and I hated her for that. Hated her for being able to fall asleep while I sat outside feeling like the ground was moving under my feet. I thought about checking her phone, but I didn't. Not because I'm noble, because I knew I couldn't unsee whatever was there. The moment I looked would be the moment I stopped being the man who wasn't sure and started being the man who knew. Instead, I looked through her bag. Quietly. Carefully. I don't even know what I was looking for. Maybe a piece of gum. Maybe a clue. And then I found it. A folded piece of thick hotel stationery, wedged between her wallet and her lipstick. My name wasn't on it, but it had been written recently. Fresh ink. Clean folds. I held it like it was radioactive. It said, "I thought this was just a memory, but tonight it felt real again." I don't know what that means. I'll meet you at 12:45 by the elevators if you still want to talk. No signature. No name. Just her handwriting. Neat. Intimate. Careful. I sat there staring at it, my pulse thudding in my ears. I kept checking the time on the hospital wall clock like I'd find some kind of answer there. It was 12:19. So I did what I never thought I'd do. I left the hospital. Not because I didn't care. Because I did. And because, for the first time, I wanted proof. Not gut feelings. Not weird moments or uncomfortable hugs. I wanted to see. I wanted to know exactly what she meant by just a memory. The hotel was only 12 minutes away. I made it in 9. I didn't know what I expected. A confession in whispers? An apology? Maybe just an awkward conversation between old friends that I could blow out of proportion if I needed to justify how hollow I felt. Maybe nothing. But I got there in time. I parked. I walked into that lobby, quiet and dim under those fancy chandeliers. And I waited. 12:43, 12:44, 12:45, and then the elevator dinged. She stepped out, heels in one hand, the same red dress slightly wrinkled at the waist. Her hair was pulled back like she'd done it quickly in a mirror. She didn't see me at first, because she was smiling at someone behind her. And when he stepped out, jacket off, shirt untucked, the same smirk I remembered from the reunion, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. They just stood there close. Not touching, but too close to explain away. I didn't confront them. I didn't scream or make a scene. I just turned around, walked outside, sat in my car, and watched the hotel's glass doors, and realized something I hadn't admitted out loud until that exact second. This wasn't her mistake. It was a decision. I didn't turn the engine on. I sat in the car with my hands on the wheel, headlights off, windows slightly cracked, watching the revolving glass doors of the hotel. The red dress, the loose shirt, the shared silence between two people who already said too much. It was like watching a scene from a movie I didn't remember auditioning for, but suddenly realized I'd been playing the fool in all along. They didn't leave together right away. They stood just outside the lobby for a few minutes. She lit a cigarette. I didn't even know she smoked again. He said something, and she laughed, not loudly, but in that familiar way. The kind of laugh that feels like a hand sliding under the skin. And then they started walking. Not holding hands. Nothing dramatic. But side by side, like it was normal. Like it was theirs. I followed. Not close. Just enough to see. I turned the key and let the car roll quietly down the block before turning the headlights back on. They didn't look back. They had no reason to. They walked 2 blocks to the parking garage. She kept glancing at him, tucking her hair behind her ear, asking him things I'd never hear. He nodded slowly, never looking rushed, never looking guilty. And when they got to his car, she reached for the door handle, but didn't open it. She leaned against it instead. And then, finally, she looked up at him with that look, the one I hadn't seen in years. The one I thought belonged to our early days. The look that says you still make me feel something. He didn't kiss her. He didn't touch her. But he didn't have to. Whatever they'd done, or hadn't done, was already between them, hanging in the air, filling the silence. Their closeness had nothing to do with sex. It had everything to do with absence. My absence. My fault. Maybe. Maybe not. I didn't know anymore. I didn't wait for her to drive away. I backed out and left before they could see me. I didn't need to see anything else. What haunted me wasn't what they were doing. It was how natural it all looked. Like they'd rehearsed this years ago. Like I was the disruption in their story. When I finally made it home, the house felt cold. Unlived in. I walked past the pile of mail, past the bowl with 2 sets of keys, past the framed photo of us at some lake I can't even name now. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out my phone, and stared at the lock screen. I could text her. Ask where she was. Pretend I didn't know. Act concerned. Start a fight. Make it obvious. But I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop and searched his name. I remembered enough from the reunion. His face, his voice, the way people greeted him like he never left their orbit. It took 10 minutes to find him. He was exactly who I feared he'd be. Accomplished, charming, well-liked, untouchable. A few blurry photos from the reunion had already made it online. And there they were. Smiling, standing too close, cropped just enough to not be scandalous, but not enough to be innocent. And in the comments section, a name I didn't recognize. About time you two found each other again. I stared at that line for too long. Reread it. Saved a screenshot. Closed the laptop. It's strange how betrayal doesn't feel like fire. It doesn't burn. It chills. Quietly. Like standing under a slow leak in the ceiling that you didn't notice until the floor caves in beneath you. And that night, as I lay in bed alone, her side untouched, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. I just whispered the one question that scared me more than anything. What if she's happier without me, and always has been? I didn't say a word the next morning. She came home around 7:30 a.m. I heard the door open while I was still sitting in the same spot on the living room couch, fully dressed, legs numb, the TV glowing with the menu screen for a documentary I never started. She didn't tiptoe or sneak in. That would have meant guilt. She walked in like she had nothing to answer for, set her bag on the counter, and poured herself a glass of water like she hadn't just stepped out of another man's orbit. Her voice was quiet but casual. The hospital called. They said I can come back this afternoon for more tests. I nodded, not looking up. She sat across from me, barefoot, shoulders slightly hunched, and said nothing more. Just sipped water and checked something on her phone. Her silence wasn't scared. It was practiced. Comfortable. The kind of silence you keep when you already told your truth somewhere else, and now you're just waiting for someone to catch up. That's when I decided to stop waiting. I didn't leave. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. But I started to remove myself, piece by piece. That afternoon, while she napped, to recover, I turned off location sharing on my phone. I disabled read receipts. I deleted all sync devices and logged out of every shared app. The digital equivalent of vanishing, without packing a bag. And the next morning, I tested it. I left the house before dawn, drove west, no destination, just the quiet hum of the highway and a growing nausea in my gut that no amount of music or caffeine could drown out. I didn't text her, didn't answer her one missed call. I waited 7 hours before returning, just parked around the corner and watched the house. She wasn't there. I came in. The bed was made. The dishwasher was running. Her shoes were gone. But what struck me most wasn't the emptiness. It was the note on the counter, written on the back of an old utility bill envelope. It said, "Gone for lunch. We'll talk when I get back." We. Not you and I. Not Ezra. Just we. Like I was one of several. And something about that broke the part of me that still thought this might just be a bad chapter in a decent marriage. No, this was a full rewrite. And I was being written out quietly, like a side character who didn't test well with audiences. So I pushed further. I took the next day off work without telling her. Turned off my phone again. Disappeared to a public library 2 towns over. No signal. No cameras. Just silence and an old spiral notebook I found in the glove box, where I started writing every lie I had let slide for the last year. The dentist appointments that took too long. The work trips where her luggage came back rearranged. The way she started calling me Izzy again, only after she'd stopped calling me love. And the more I wrote, the less I recognized our life together. It wasn't rage I felt. It was absence. Like being in a room where someone once sang, and now there's just dust. When I got home that evening, the envelope was still there. But this time, it had something new inside, her wedding ring. No note. No explanation. Just metal. Cold, small, final. I didn't sleep that night. I just held the ring between my fingers and tried to remember what it had felt like the day I gave it to her. Tried to picture her smile, her tears, the vows. But the harder I tried, the more the images blurred, until all I could see was her stepping off that elevator with a different smile, meant for someone else. And still, even after all of that, one thought kept looping like static in the back of my mind. What if she left the ring not as a goodbye, but as a test of her own? I didn't bring up the ring. Not when she got home. Not when she casually asked if I'd already eaten. Not even when she walked barefoot into the kitchen, opened the fridge, and pulled out the container of leftover soup like nothing had changed. She never asked if I saw it, and I never asked why she left it. Instead, I invited her to dinner. I don't know why I phrased it that way. Invited. Like it wasn't our house. Like we hadn't shared that dining table for 6 years. But she blinked in surprise, almost dropped the lid, and said, "Tonight." I nodded. Somewhere nice. She didn't ask what the occasion was. She didn't ask if it was about him. That told me everything I needed. We went to a place we hadn't been in years, a little Italian restaurant tucked behind a bookstore, the kind of spot you forget until someone leaves you and you realize you should have taken them more often. I picked it on purpose. It held no obvious memories. It wasn't where we had our first date, or our anniversary, or any of our good fights. It was neutral ground. She wore that same red dress again. I don't know if it was a message or laziness, but she didn't look at me when she wore it. She looked through me, like she was imagining a different man sitting across the table. We ordered wine, breadsticks, polite conversation. She talked about a new project at work. I nodded at all the right times. She never asked where I'd been for the past 2 days. Never mentioned the silence. She was trying to normalize a broken world. And then, between bites of pasta and gulps of carefully poured lies, I slid a small folded piece of paper across the table. She stared at it. Didn't touch it. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I found in your bag," I said quietly. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she unfolded it. It wasn't the hotel note. It was a copy I had rewritten by hand, word for word, on plain paper. She read it once, then again, then folded it back up and placed it neatly beside her water glass. Her eyes didn't rise. Instead, she said softly, "You went through my things?" The calmness in her voice wasn't defensive, it was disappointed. Like I had ruined a moment she had wanted to control. Like I had opened a book before she was ready to read it to me. I let the silence settle. "I saw you," I said. Still, she didn't look up. "Where?" "At the elevator." That landed. She swallowed too hard. Her throat moved in that unmistakable way people do when they've run out of ways to pretend. "I didn't sleep with him," she said, so quietly the jazz from the corner speaker nearly drowned it out. "I didn't ask," I replied. She finally looked up. Her eyes weren't angry. They were something worse, empty. The kind of eyes that already said goodbye months ago, but forgot to inform the mouth. "I never wanted to hurt you, Ezra." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was the most predictable thing she could have said. "You didn't hurt me," I said, pushing my chair back. "You replaced me." She flinched. Not from volume. I hadn't raised my voice, but from clarity. And before she could respond, I stood up, laid some cash on the table, and walked out into the night air that somehow felt colder than it should have been. She didn't follow. She didn't call. She didn't even wait 5 minutes to pay her half of the bill. I watched through the windshield of my parked car as she stayed seated, sipping her wine, alone under that soft yellow light. And something about it struck me. She didn't look abandoned. She looked relieved. I didn't go home that night. Not because I was punishing her. Not because I wanted her to worry. I just didn't want to see her anymore. Didn't want to walk through the front door and smell the fabric softener she liked. Didn't want to hear the television humming with sitcom laughter while we sat 2 oceans apart on the same couch. I booked a room at a cheap little place near the train station. No mint on the pillow. No room service. But it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I sat on a bed and exhaled without bracing for the sound of another person's disappointment. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just breathed. For hours. It felt like my body was finally syncing up with the truth my mind had been dragging behind for months. I wasn't leaving her. She had already left me. I was just catching up. The next morning, I made coffee in a paper cup and watched the sunrise from a stairwell. It was nothing special, just rooftops and fog and the smell of diesel from the bakery truck downstairs. But it felt real, quiet, undemanding. That day, I called my sister. Told her everything. For the first time. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just said, "Come stay with us for a few days. Just rest." I don't think I realized how badly I needed someone to offer that until she did. Back at the house, I returned in the afternoon to pack some things. The ring was still where I'd left it, untouched on the kitchen counter. She wasn't home. That helped. I didn't take much, just a duffel bag, some clothes, the dog-eared book she once bought me and never asked if I finished. I looked around that house and realized something strange. It no longer felt like a crime scene. It felt like a place where someone else was supposed to be now. Not me. I left her a note. Short. Not bitter. "I hope you find what you've been looking for. I'm finally giving myself permission to do the same." No accusations. No begging. Just a line she could reread 1,000 times and never argue with. And then I walked out the front door. Not shattered. Not victorious. Just lighter. Weeks passed. I got a place of my own. Tiny, loud, kind of ugly. But it had a balcony and a coffee shop downstairs where they learned my name after 4 visits. I started running in the mornings. Reading again. Writing in that spiral notebook I once filled with everything she broke. Only now I was filling it with things I wanted to rebuild. And one afternoon, months later, I got a letter. Handwritten. No return address. It was from her. She said she was sorry. That she'd confused nostalgia with possibility. that she never stopped loving who I used to be, but hadn't loved who I'd become. And for the first time, I didn't feel gutted reading her words. I felt free. Because here's the thing. I'm not angry anymore. Not at her. Not at him. Not even at myself. Sometimes people drift. Sometimes they reach for the past to escape the discomfort of the present. Sometimes they choose the wrong person, not because they're cruel, but because they never really knew themselves. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply walking away, not in rage, but in peace. She thought she collapsed that night, but it was me who finally hit the floor, and then learned how to stand. And now, I'm not standing still anymore. I'm moving forward. And for once, that's enough.